The ceremonial data pad didn't shatter so much as it sighed under Xylar's heavy, tightness book. Aria Mercer lay beside it, her head lolling against the cold steel of the observation deck. Silence followed the crick. Not a single guard moved. Came the dread that vibrated through Vorn's thoracic plates as he watched from the console. Why was the human diplomat staring at the ceiling with such calm eyes while her blood pooled on the deck? The SCI-FIans believed they were the predators. They didn't realize they were just being measured. You'll see the exact moment the scale tipped in a second. 72 hours before the first SCI-Fian sun crusher went dark. The hardest choice Aria Mercer faced was which silk scarf best projected neutrality. She had settled on a pale cream, a mundane detail that would later become a permanent stain on the hegemony's collective memory. It was a scrap of fabric destined to be recorded in the final archives of a dying empire. Within the vaulted halls of Aetheris Station, the smell of recycled nitrogen mixed with the expensive perfumes of 1,000 diplomats. As an adjutant, Vorn maintained the official records, his exoskeleton polished to a reflective sheen. Rigidly stood the SCI-Fian guard, their multi-jointed limbs locked. We were the lords of a 10-year reign, and the humans were merely a footnote in our expansion. Upon the screen of her ceremonial data pad, a wrong detail flickered. Aria wasn't reading the territorial concession demands drafted by the SCI-Fian High Command. Instead, she was scrolling through localized drain cycles for a backwater moon in the Caliban Reach. A world we hadn't bothered to map. This made no sense. 72 hours remained on the ultimatum. Yet she studied the precipitation of a dead rock. Near the podium, the air began to taste of metallic ozone, a side effect of the pulse disruptor matrix humanity had quietly installed beneath the floor to bypass our multifaceted shielding. A biological anchor ray, living pulse, was required to synchronize the subatomic interference. Aria Mercer was that anchor. Through her veins flowed the calibration for a weapon that erased the mathematical possibility of defense. Frequently, Aria's thumb would trace the lower right corner of the obsidian data pad. That specific sensor, hers, polished with rhythmic intent, it looked like a nervous tick. The small gesture of a woman out of her depth in a room full of 8 ex-predators. In truth, every press was a manual override, stripping away the safety limiters of a system that would soon boil the vacuum. Your patience is commendable, Mercer. Xylar's voice grated. He reached for his blue silk cloth, meticulously polishing his primary eye lenses, a cultural quirk that always preceded a calculated lie. But the hegemony does not negotiate with species that possess fewer than a dozen systems. It's 72 hours, or total glassing, a single rotation for you to vanish. A junior tactical officer scoffed at the human long-range scans displayed on the wall. Their Armada is 40% logistics vessels. He whispered to Xylar, mostly kitchens and postal shuttles. Aria's thumb paused on the glass. Those are the kitchens and mail ships, she murmured without looking up. The actual warships are still behind the Caliban moon, waiting for me to finish my coffee. Patience. It wasn't a virtue to the SCI-Fians. It was a symptom of the weak. Aria finally looked up, her gaze bypassing Xylar to lock onto the windows where the Aetheris sun hung in silent orbit. The SCI-Fian High Command sat in their thrones, their clicking mandibles forming a rhythmic, predatory applause. They were waiting for her to beg for her world. Instead, she simply tapped the data pad one final time, the rain cycle for Caliban finally reaching 100% humidity. Observing the diplomat, Vorn noticed her eyes slide shut for a long, deliberate second. Terror, he assumed. This was the biological shutdown of a creature that finally understood the scale of the approaching doom. He recorded the flinch as a sign of imminent surrender. Never did he suspect she was merely calibrating her retinas to the blinding light of the fleet, already jumping into the system. Is the transmission clear? Kalen. Mercer's voice was a whisper in the comms bead. Chris. Them, the boy replied. Every colony is watching. The signal is locked. She continued tracing her thumb over the data pad as Xylar boomed about the 10-year reign. Through the viewports, the Aetheris sun bathed the station in a deceptively warm light, hiding the Terran warships waiting just beyond the lunar shadow. Identification request. Vorn screamed into his console as the ghost signal spiked. "Whose fleet is this?" The reply came not in code, but in a flat Terran broadcast. "This is the Aetheris, Armada." A voice stated, "You were warned about the 72 hours. You used 60 of them to sharpen your knives." Thorn looked at the screen. The kitchens and mail ships were still there, but their mass had tripled as they dropped their kinetic decoys. At a secondary console, a senior adjutant sat meticulously organizing a tray of nutrient vials by color. The glass tubes clinked softly as he shifted a lime green essence to the left, ensuring perfect symmetry. The patience broke. Xylar's limb descended. A sharp crack of impact echoed through the hall. Mercer fell, her head snapping back as she met the cold steel. Silence was heavier than gravity. "Submit," Xylar spat, standing over her as the data pad skidded across the floor. The diplomat simply looked at the ceiling. Her retinas wide and adjusted to the dark. "Sync complete," she whispered. "Aria's blood hits the deck, and every star in the other system turns blood red." It wasn't a stellar catastrophe. It was the pulse-disruptor matrix assisting with the biological anchor's trauma. The red light was the atmospheric ionization of every SCI-FI shield failing across the sector. "Emergency protocols are failing." Vorn cried out to the High Command. "The fleet is blind." He watched in clinical horror as his console turned into a waterfall of crimson error codes. The 10 Sorrow year reign was being dismantled by a software patch triggered by a single drop of human iron. Over the common speakers, the sound of 19-year-old Elan's shaky, terrified breathing filled the vacuum. He was a communications officer whose only duty was to ensure the ultimatum's transmission remained unbroken for the galaxy to witness. Each ragged inhalation caught in his throat, a sharp but sound that carried across light years to every SCI-FI household. The sound made the ensuing destruction personal. It transformed a tactical engagement into a moral execution, making the end of our hegemony sound like a child gasping for air. 3 years later, the woman sat on the high bench of the tribunal, her voice a calm echo in the silent chamber. "You mistook our patience for weakness," she said, looking down at Xylar in the prisoner's dock. He sat with his exoskeleton dull and unpolished, refusing to meet her gaze. The Aetheris system was no longer the heart of an empire, but a graveyard of derelict hulls orbiting a forgotten peace. In the museum's vacuum-sealed display, the ceremonial data pad sits under a soft spotlight. The obsidian surface is still scarred by a web of cracks radiating from the bottom right corner. The shattered screen remains frozen on a weather report for a moon called Caliban. 100% humidity. The dark ship above continued its silent orbit, steel and shadow against an empty sky.